My name's Andy. I'm a very grateful, recovered, but definitely not cured alcoholic. It's good to be here with you again. We are in the doctor's opinion, and we should get through the rest of the doctor's opinion this week. So last week we left it on page XXIX, and we are about halfway down. So we've just heard from Dr. Silkworth about these hopeless cases who, without a profound psychic change, they seem absolutely hopeless. And so now he's going to go on and explain some of the types of situation that he was faced with in his work. So, men have cried out to me in sincere and despairing appeal, "Doctor, I can't go on like this. I have everything to live for. I must stop. But I cannot. You must help me." Faced with this problem, if a doctor is honest with himself, he must sometimes feel his own inadequacy. Although he gives all that is in him, it is often not enough. One feels that something more than human power is needed to produce the essential psychic change. Though the aggregate of recoveries resulting from psychiatric effort is considerable, we physicians must admit we have made little impression on the problem as a whole. Many types do not respond to the ordinary psychological approach. And you've got to remember that the guy writing this is William Silkworth. He's given his whole life, pretty much, the treatment of alcoholics. At the time of writing this, he would have been working at the town's hospital for 9-10 years, which was the premier detox centre, right? So he's like the leading doctor on it, in the leading place, and yet their success rate at the time was about 2%. I don't know about you, but if I turned up doing my job every day and my success rate was 2%, that'd be pretty demoralising, wouldn't it? You know, 1 in 50 people that Dr. Silkworth treated through the traditional methods did show some signs of recovery and got better. 49 didn't, out of every 50. So that's what he's explaining here. I do not hold, and this is the conclusion he comes to, I do not hold with those who believe that alcoholism is entirely a problem of mental control. I have had many men who had, for example, worked a period of months on some problem or business deal, which was to be settled on a certain date, favourably to them. So this is when something's all going well and nice. They took a drink or so prior to the date, and then the phenomenon of craving at once became paramount to all other interests, so that the important appointment was not met. These men were not drinking to escape. They were drinking to overcome a craving beyond their mental control. So, you know, there are many of us that go, well, I drank because everything was going bad. But this is they said he saw just many people where things were going well, and they still would pick up that drink and then it would take over and blow everything. And this is really where we start to link up the fact it's a twofold illness. It's that mental obsession and the physical craving. There are many situations which rise out of the phenomenon of craving which cause men to make the supreme sacrifice rather than continue to fight. The classification of alcoholics seems most difficult, and in much detail is outside the scope of this book. There are, of course, and now we get 5 types or classifications of alcoholics. So the first type number 1, the psychopaths who are emotionally unstable. We are all familiar with this type. They are always going on the wagon for keeps. They are over remorseful and make many resolutions, but never a decision. And we got the second type 2. There is the type of man who is unwilling to admit that he cannot take a drink. He plans various ways of drinking. He changes his brand or his environment. And then there is the type, so this is type number 3, who always believes that after being entirely free from alcohol for a period of time, he can take a drink without danger. And then there is the manic depressive type, so this is type 4, who is perhaps the least understood by his friends and about whom a whole chapter could be written. And then there are types, this is the 5th one, and the one that everyone thinks they are when they get here, entirely normal, In every respect, except in the effect that alcohol has upon them, they are often able, intelligent, friendly people. And certainly when I got to the rooms of AA, hardly wanted to admit I was an alcoholic. And when I started to see that I was, and I wanted to know what type I was definitely the fifth type. I was intelligent. The interesting thing as a result of going through these steps, these beautiful 12 steps, which take us on a fact-finding and facing journey and all sorts of things, I now see myself in all 5 of those types when I'm really honest about it. But, if you were to give someone a questionnaire and go, well, which one are you? Are you a psychopath? Are you a deluded idiot? Are you in denial that you've been cured? Are you a manic depressive? Or are you normal and intelligent? They always pick 5, don't they? And I certainly thought that. But like I say, I can see myself in all those types now. All of these, so regardless of which type you are, all of these and many others have one symptom in common. They cannot start drinking without developing the phenomenon of craving. This phenomenon, as we have suggested, may be the manifestation of an allergy which differentiates these people and sets them apart as a distinct entity. It has never been, by any treatment with which we are familiar, and remember, this is Dr. Silkworth writing, who was the leading guy at the time, and there has never been any treatment with which we are familiar permanently eradicated. So in other words, there is no cure. Once we're an alcoholic, we're always an alcoholic. Once we're pickled, we can't go back to being a cucumber. The only relief we have to suggest is entire abstinence. Yeah, I didn't like the sound of that when I first read it. And if you're new here, you probably don't like the sound of that either. Because I didn't believe that it would be possible to completely abstain from alcohol and have a good, happy life. But that's, I didn't know anything when I got here. This immediately precipitates us into a seething cauldron of debate. Much has been written pro and con, but among physicians, the general opinion seems to be that most chronic alcoholics are doomed. Not particularly good news, at that point. But then we get into some solution. What is the solution? Perhaps I can best answer this by relating one of my experiences. About 1 year prior to this experience, a man was brought in to be treated for chronic alcoholism. He had but partially recovered from a gastric hemorrhage and seemed to be a case of pathological mental deterioration. Now, I don't want to paint too gory a picture, but gastric hemorrhage, the guy's basically bleeding out his arse, right? And that's how severe his alcoholism was. He had lost everything worthwhile in life and was only living, one might say, to drink. He frankly admitted and believed that for him there was no hope. Following the elimination of alcohol, there was found to be no permanent brain injury. He accepted the plan outlined in this book. 1 year later, he called to see me, and I experienced a very strange sensation. I knew the man by name and partly recognised his features, but there all resemblance ended. From a trembling, despairing, nervous wreck had emerged a man brimming over with self-reliance and contentment. I talked with him for some time, but was not able to bring myself to feel that I had known him before. To me he was a stranger, and so he left me. A long time has passed with no return to alcohol. And the guy that we're talking about here is Hank Parkhurst, and who got sober in 1935. And without Hank Parkhurst, we probably wouldn't have the big book. He pushed Bill to publish the big book. Hank Parker was the guy who came up with the works publishing idea. Hank Parker was the idea that came up with the stocks idea that got the big book started. He came from a sales background, was a sales manager for a big company. And his story can be found, not in our big book though. You have to go to the book Experience, Strength and Hope, which has the stories that were taken out. And Hank's story was taken out because sadly, Hank eventually drunk and died a drunk. And if you actually look at his story beyond the one that's written Experience, Strength and Hope, you can see really what happened. Hank Parkhurst had so much purpose in getting the book out. And when he got the book out, it looks like he just forgot his primary purpose, that he had to pass this on to other alcoholics. And once we lose that purpose and we're not doing it, we know that it's a slippery slope before we go back out. And that was sadly the case with Hank Parkhurst. But a man that God, as I understand him, or as you, God certainly used that bunch, didn't he? I mean, what a bunch of guys, you know. A stockbroker who wasn't particularly good at stockbroking and was a drunk, a doctor, Ebby, you had this, you know, these people that God mightily used, and we owe so much to. Because, you know, it doesn't matter when you're walking in that sunlight of the Spirit that we find out about later on, you see all this great stuff happen. That's why it's so important that we stay in it and we keep doing this and we keep passing it on. Anyway, when I need a mental uplift, I often think of another case brought in by a physician prominent in New York. The patient had made his own diagnosis and, deciding his situation hopeless, had hidden in a deserted barn, determined to die. He was rescued by a searching party and, in desperate condition, brought to me. Following his physical rehabilitation, he had a talk with me in which he frankly stated he thought the treatment a waste of effort unless I could assure him, which no one ever had, in the future he would have the willpower, in quotes, to resist the impulse to drink. His alcoholic problem was so complex and his depression so great that he felt the only hope would be through what we then called moral psychology, and we doubted if even that would have any effect. However, he did become sold on the ideas contained in this book and has not had a drink for a great many years. And the guy that he's talking about there is Fitz Mayo. That's our southern gentleman that you can read his story on page 208 of the 4th edition of the Big Book. And Fitz Mayo started AA in Washington, D.C. And if it wasn't for Fitz Mayo, he was the one that a lot of his input made the Big Book change from being what would have been just very much a college-style textbook into a slightly more biblically religious, sort of trying to bridge that thing. And it was down to him that happened. And I think the way that our beautiful book came together with all that input just shows the power of a group conscience, doesn't it? I see him now and then, and he is as fine a specimen of manhood as anyone could wish to meet. I earnestly advise every alcoholic to read this book through and through. Oh, through and though he, though perhaps he came to scoff, he may remain a prey. William D. Silkworth, M.D. And as we said before, his name didn't appear in the first print of the first edition. He was the chief guy at Towns Hospital from 1930 until his death in 1951. He dedicated over 21 years of his life to helping others, working with people with mental problems, and helping hugely alcoholics. And if it wasn't for William Silkworth, I don't think any of us would be here today. It was a doctor being brave enough to stand up and say, look, I'm a doctor, I'm a man of science, but I think you need something more. I think this needs a spiritual approach. And boy, was he right. And the rest of it got born out of that. And we will be into Bill's story next week. But you know what? If you take anything away from this tonight, please look at these cases that they talk about, these really hopeless cases. You might be new and you might be thinking, this feels hopeless right now. I don't know what that feels like, because I felt that way when I came here. But reading this doctor's opinion taught me what this disease is, and it taught me to see it as a disease. And why shouldn't I accept it as a disease? The World Health Organization do, the American Medical Association do, the NHS do. Doctors generally agree it's a disease, right? So if you had diabetes, you'd go take the treatment that you had to take. If you had cancer, you'd go and take the cancer treatment and hopefully you would recover, right? If we got alcohol, our solution is spiritual, which means we don't have to go through horrible things. You might have to go for a detox in the early days, but beyond that, we get this by applying a set of steps that radically change our lives and give us a profound psychic change. And if you are new, please get a big book, get someone to be your sponsor and go through these steps. Become the best version of you, which is the version of you that God of your understanding wants you to be. I'm going to leave it there. Looking forward to hearing what you've got to say back on the doctor's opinion. Thank you.